Hey everyone, Daniel Bloodworth here with Brandon Jones.
Hi, everybody.
And we're doing things a little bit differently because multiple reasons, but we also did a preview kind of similar to this. So I had an appointment with Sabotage Studio for GDC, and GDC is not happening this week. And so they sent over basically their GDC demo. And then this morning I interviewed them and followed up and got some more details. So I got to watch the demo. Brandon got to watch the demo, but I was the only one who was able to actually talk to them. Yeah, so the game is called Sea of Stars. And these are the same guys that made The Messenger, and this is their second game as a studio. Brandon, what were you thinking when you heard that the Messenger team was making a new game? What were your first thoughts?
I didn't get to play the Messenger, but it looked really interesting. I love just bold sprite work, especially in this day and age, and that definitely seemed like an accomplished studio. That seemed like a studio that did a really good use of their resources that they had. And from what I heard, there was just lots of good vibes around the Messenger. A lot of people said really, really good things about it. And so it's interesting. It kind of seems very soon after, having all the success of that game to find out about their new project. I initially was like, okay, one of the reasons that I'm just not like a platformers don't jump super high to, on top of my backlog. And when you first said, they're going to be doing another game, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then you were checking out the preview and you're like, oh, it's turn-based RPG. And I was like, oh, go on.
Yeah.
And I want to let you get into the specific details, but watching that preview that they sent over, I love everything that I saw. That game looks fantastic.
Yeah. What's interesting is it's the same universe as The Messenger, but it's like, I think they said hundreds of thousands of years in the past. But they did have one part of the Messenger. There's a sunken shrine where that they said that kind of hinted at what this game was going to be. There's some guardians that you came across, some spirits that used to be guardians of the world, and that kind of plays into this. When I was talking to them this morning, Brandon, one of the things that was interesting is they actually had this game in mind from the start.
Feels like it.
But they wanted, because they just started up as a studio, they wanted to take on something a little bit simpler. Didn't have to worry about like all the RPG mechanics and all of that kind of thing. But I guess sort of their goal as a studio, it feels like, is to tackle some of these old school genres and bring them to light with modernized gameplay and bring in a more approachable way.
And I'm so about that. Because we all had those dreams when we were playing these games back on the Super Nintendo. I definitely get a strong Super Nintendo vibe from this developer, and it's fascinating to look at it right away and say, oh, okay, this looks like something that you could potentially play on the Super Nintendo. And then as the preview goes along, they start to break down. No, there's no way you could have. There's so many more elements, whether it is stuff that generally we weren't thinking about when people were developing games like this, or just the technology wasn't there yet. I'm excited to see even more of what they haven't shown just in the brief little glimpse that we got.
Yeah, like there's a lot of detail and all of the sprites and the textures and just like even the foliage is just super fleshed out. And if you've played the Messenger, you kind of have an idea what to expect there. Only like now we're in like a top-down RPG world. One of the things that they've said actually kind of multiple times is that they want this game to be as fun to explore, as fun as to hang out in as it is to play. So not just focusing on combat mechanics. And so I think that we saw a little bit of that in the demo. They show places where like you can actually like jump down or climb up onto like a cliff, which is something that, again, like you've seen those kind of cliffs, these like kind of multi-level areas in a lot of those RPGs and Zelda games of that time, but you'd have to find like a staircase or something, right? If you wanted to go down to a different level. And here it's like, yeah, just hop down.
I think one of the moments, yeah, that really struck a chord with me was when he went through a cave and then climbed up through the cave out to a little, the exit of the cave onto like a little cliff edge, and then picked up a weapon or fought some people, and then just normally you'd have to go back through the cave to then continue traveling, and he just jumped off the edge. And it's like, again, just one of those things that seems so simple, but a lot of the games of the time and a lot of RPGs that look like this that have been released since, don't do stuff like that.
I was asking them about influences, and I just kind of threw like 3 examples out there from watching the demo. And I said Mario RPG because there is like timing based attack and defense stuff, right? So when you attack, you want to like hit the button on that swing to do more damage or to defend yourself. Then Chrono Trigger because you come across enemies and you just fight them in the world. There's not a separate battle screen. And then Golden Sun, which in my mind I was just thinking the fact that there is the protagonist looks kind of like Isaac from Golden Sun, but I actually nailed him on all 3 points. But what they're saying, one of the things with Golden Sun is that interactivity of the world. Again, being able to do stuff and use your abilities in the world and move things around.
One of the things that really struck me, even just about fighting stuff out in the world, I think, Chrono Trigger was the one that was like, probably was on your short list. That's probably one of the 3 because the characters look very similar, just proportion, and that's something that you really have to consider when you're making a pixelated top-down RPG. Is how big do I want these characters to be in relation to how big the world is? And I think they really nailed it in terms of you can really get a sense of the physicality of the characters, but at the same time the world still looks big. There's a great overworld that they cut to at one point that looks really neat. Everything scales up really well.
And even that overworld that they showed, like that was an overworld for one island, right?
Yeah.
So they talked about there will actually be a ship, and you will sail to many different islands, and it's actually set up like Mass Effect. So there's another influence for you, so that as your party grows, they have different cabins in the ship, and you can go around and talk to them and check in on them, see how they're doing, and potentially, I would guess there might even be side quests.
He only did a couple of fights, and that was interesting, actually. He maneuvered past a lot of enemies. There was definitely a sense. There were some parts where he would run to the edge of a place he could navigate, and then would see an enemy and would wait for that enemy to walk out of the way, and then would move past it. And so there isn't, I don't know if this will change in certain areas, but from what we saw, there wasn't any of the enemies seeing you in the overworld and then running to where you were. Like, you really do get to manually decide whether you want to attack them or not. And when a battle was over, the game really just kind of moved on. Like, there wasn't some big kind of fanfare. The stats come up, you see how much money you got or your items or anything. It just, I don't know if that was just for the demo's sake, but I thought that was contributed a lot to the game's pace, that you just move on to the next enemy or move on to the next thing you want to do in the world.
And one of the things that they said is that in terms of modernizing things is that they're actually trying to design it so that you're not really having to grind. They're trying to basically eliminate grinding. And so when you clear through an area, you will like clear out a lot of those enemies, and then there'll be optional areas where you can get more XP if you feel like you need it. But you're not just going around like doing loops in the same area to level up. So as somebody who likes to grind a lot, I'm not sure how you feel about that, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. But I mean, the reason why I like to grind is because some games demand it, some games that definitely works out in your favor. So for games that are like, no, we're going to structure that around so you don't necessarily have to do that, like, I'm fine with that. I just enjoy getting stronger. So if the game allows me, to do that, then that's fine.
Yeah.
But I appreciate you thinking of my feelings, Bloodworth.
Kind of sort of the character / structure elements. So there is. He referred to them as a moon girl and a sun boy. The girl's name, I think, is Valere or Valerie or something along those lines. When you see it in text, you don't always know how to pronounce things. But she fights with a staff. They described her as a monk, and she's a little bit slower. And then I think the boy's name is Zale, and he's a blade dancer, and he's more agile. And I asked them what that meant. When you're dealing with the turn-based RPG, And it sounds like it comes out more in terms of their personality and their animations. So as like say when you do that blocking button press, right, when somebody attacks you, she might block with her staff, but then he might actually just like dodge out of the way. Um, so that's kind of more of an expression of their fighting style and how things will animate more than necessarily something like inherently gameplay focused. So you will have them in your party. So they, I think they're called Solstice Warriors, and they're able to control the sun and the moon. And eventually, so there is like night and day stuff. There's a day-night cycle that goes on. There will be campfires and inns that you can stay at to kind of progress time forward. There'll be characters that are only available during day or night. But eventually you will be able to control the sun and the moon. And what was interesting about that is they said that's not actually like fast forwarding time so much as it's physically moving the sun and the moon.
That's what it seemed to me, because there was one point when they tried to meet with a character. They said, oh, he's not going to be back here until nighttime, and they couldn't just like bring the moon up and then that solved that problem. It's like, no, that doesn't, he's still where he is. He's not going to be here until later is what we mean. And so, yeah, it's interesting to like be living in that world, and then all of a sudden you're in like a totally different island than they are, and like, whoop, there goes the moon. So yeah, that's an interesting power. And it's, they talked a lot about shadows and how the sprite isn't just suddenly like, I'm in shadow now, I'm in sunlight now. It's like you can actually see the line of the shadow go over the character as they're moving. And the differences in day and night, and they had like parts of the river that would light up when it was nighttime. And yeah, there's been games, even just like Google Earth in VR, which I love to do. You can just grab the sun and move it around. I love messing around with that stuff. So it's fun to think of it having gameplay ramifications, but also just being fun to use. You just get into an environment. There were some times he used it because he wanted us to get a better view of something. When he switched to the overworld, he was like, wait, hold on a second. Let me switch it to day so it looks better. And so it'd be interesting to potentially maybe even go back to areas that you were before where you were like, oh, I haven't seen this place at night because I just ran through to do the thing I had to do.
They've got some of their technical guys. They've got a guy from Shadow of Mordor and a guy from Assassin's Creed. And he was kind of talking about that they've done some quote unquote black magic with the lighting.
Yeah.
But in terms of their weapons, because I was asking how weapon upgrades would work, because they seem to be like the characters seem to be very tied to those weapons, right? And so he said you won't be getting new weapons. What you'll instead will get. You'll get materials, so that like once you do like unlock a blacksmith and stuff, that you go to them and they upgrade their weapons, because their weapons are actually like magical artifacts, and so they are very important to their characters, and they've trained with them and all this. And they are partly doing that because they wanted to avoid kind of the RPG trope of like you go. They said, yeah, the further north you go, the better the weapons get, and like how does that make any sense? This poor blacksmith charges you $20,000 for a hammer, and then he's still poor afterwards. And so it sounds like they're trying to like tackle some of those things, some of those cliches head on. Another one that they talked about, they didn't specifically say how, but they talked about they want to take on like item hoarding, so that you don't like save up 80 elixirs and then use 50 on the last boss. So I'm not exactly sure what they'll do with that, but it's interesting to think that they're thinking about that stuff right now, because this game, we should have covered this earlier, but this game is only a couple months in production. The game's 2 years out, so it's really, really early look here. But yeah, just to get an idea of like what some of their goals are at this stage.
And like I said, the game feels like that because after every battle, there's just not a lot going on. And so it doesn't seem like, oh, look at all of those items that they got, or look at all that stuff that, you have to, spend a lot of time going through your inventory and managing. It doesn't seem like this is that type of adventure.
I did ask about how other party members are going to work. And so there will be a max of 3 characters in combat at any time. But you can actually like hot swap characters. So like mid battle, like if you feel like you need somebody else's ability, you can just tag them in for one of the characters that you have. And then they also talked about that there will be kind of synergies between how different characters play together. So I don't know if that means just like they innately work together, or if there will be some kind of like combo attack similar to Chrono Trigger. But that's something to keep in mind, that like your party composition will kind of help you out. And one of the ways that I think that that was shown off in the demo is they showed this spellcaster, right? And while the enemy is casting its spell, you actually see 4 boxes over their head. They called them locks. And I think that there were like 2 moon locks, a sun lock, and then like a physical damage lock. And so essentially you had to cast those types of attacks to counteract that spell and to stop that spell. And so you only had so many turns for the spell to complete to basically knock that all down. And they said the example there is like one of the simplest examples. There could be enemies that have dozens of locks potentially to get through.
Whoa.
But most of the time you won't be able to like perfectly knock them out, but each one of those locks that you knock down sort of reduces like just how badly that spell is going to affect you.
One thing you haven't talked about specifically in comment, just to yoink something right off the page, I can hear the notes that you're using, is that when you take out an enemy, they drop like an essence. I can't remember what they called it. And then you can choose to like absorb that and then use that to make your next attack stronger. So you can kind of strategize, okay, what enemy do I want to take out first, to then use that remaining energy and then, power up an attack to use it on a separate enemy. And that, depending on who sucks that up, can use that a normal attack if you don't have enough MP or SP or whatever to use your special abilities. So the sun guy sucked that up and then just used his general attack, which then became like a sun powered attack. And the moon gal she had a moonerang, which he wasn't sure if that was going to be the final name of that ability, but because she, like with a well-timed button press, she could bounce that back. She was able to do 2 moon attacks and then knock out both of those moon things, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, she has a shield as well, was her other ability that I remembered. So she could block damage by creating these little moons that orbit your characters. The villain is called the Fleshmancer.
That's a new one.
This is a Huber villain if I ever heard of one.
Not many Fleshmancers going around. It's a term you don't hear very often, and he definitely lived up to that name when they got into the dungeon. You started seeing some of the freakier enemies.
Yeah, so it's like when you're in the overworld, it looks pretty happy, looks pretty jolly, right? You've got this sunny beach kind of area. You fight some crabs and stuff. You get into this dungeon, man, and it looks like it's like straight out of Doom. There's like just all this like fleshy stuff everywhere, and like some of the creatures, and they're talking about that, like making the creatures really look like they're unnatural. So there were like these kind of blobby things with like these jaws sticking up out of the center of them, and I remember one thing that looked like it was like a skeleton, but it was like walking on its hands, and it had a long tail, and there's just an eyeball at the top of the neck. So just like really kind of crazy, creepy character designs for the enemies.
And one of the things I think that helps with is it connects you to that villain. In a lot of RPGs, they can be so big that you don't really get a sense of what the villain's up to or what they've done or kind of what impact that they're having on the world. And so it's nice when you go into these zones, it's not just, oh, this is where the darker stuff or the more evil stuff is. Like, these are literally the constructs of the main, the main antagonist that you are facing in this game. So it's nice to be reminded of that.
The one boss that they teased, they didn't even show us the boss fight, really, was it was clearly like a corrupted version of what was like naturally there already, because they talked about that, like, there was this gorilla fertility goddess, basically, who they thought had, either gone missing or had been killed or something like that. And she was bound in this dungeon, and and she asked you to go find one of her cubs, and then when you went to find the cub, there came this like really grotesque like gorilla boss that was basically just didn't have any skin on it, right? Like it's bones sticking out and meat and fat and just like really kind of crazy looking.
It was sweet. But again, it was hard to look at that gorilla kind of like you talk to that beast and it's stuck, kind of stuck to a wall, and you can tell that like these dark forces are feeding on it. And so I definitely get the sense of, you talked about the overworld looking really beautiful and it's nice. I imagine it'll be a good vibe to go into these darker places and kind of remove the scourge and free these beings that are be affected by that. I felt bad. I was like, oh no, it's tough to watch. These animals being hurt by it. These poor, gorilla babies that are just like, we miss our mom.
Yeah, but it was also an interesting chance for them to kind of lighten the mood for a moment, right? Because you went through this dreary dungeon, and then like you walk into this room and you just see a bunch of purple gorilla butts, and you're like, what's happening here? And these cute little gorilla babies come out, and like, oh, okay. So it's interesting to see how they'll balance kind of like the lighter and darker tones of this game. But any other takeaways that you have right now, Brandon?
No, I just really appreciated at the end of this preview, because this is kind of an unorthodox, like, homebrewed preview event.
Yeah.
And it was nice at the end where he was like, hey, it was funny that you asked him about crafting, because he's like, ask us about crafting. And so I imagine a lot of people were like, do you have crafting? And like, funny you should ask that. Yes, we do. That's how you upgrade your weapons. But
funny, because I didn't actually specifically ask them about crafting. I asked them about the weapons, and then they went into the crafting.
That's what I like about you, Blood. You don't go for the easy answer every time. But they definitely seem open to let people know about this project, that they are just really getting into, the bulk of it right now. Like they're just actually getting into full-time production. And so it's really interesting getting a glimpse at this point. We can get such a clear idea. I think they did a really good job. I imagine it's got to be really difficult as a developer to figure out what part of this game do we want to use as a demo. And he skipped past a lot of the dialogue stuff really quickly, and there was a lot of like redacted stuff that he said was in there. And so he's like, we don't really get too much into the story, and I'll kind of paraphrase some of the conversations that are happening, because we really just want to introduce you to the world, see how this gameplay goes, and get you just a taste of what the game is like. And then obviously there's going to be so much more to talk about, and obviously so much more to explore. So I don't feel spoiled or anything. I'm not really obsessing about like where in the game does this take place. He talked about the sailing. I don't feel bad that we didn't see that, because you look at the overworld and like, okay, I can kind of get a sense of what that looked like. And so while I would potentially have more questions, I totally saw enough today that made me, I hope this is coming to Switch. Please get this game on the Switch, because this looks like something totally up my alley. And I think the number one takeaway that really amazed me was just the movement, just swimming. And another really fun detail is he went into the water, and then like every little step that the character took into the water water level, rose on the character itself to the point where it was just like up to their neck. And those are just such fun.
A lot of reflections and stuff in the water that I thought was really impressive.
And obviously all of that is affected by time of day, where the sun or the moon is pointing. And so this looks like a really fun game to explore. It looks like it's really easy to understand, looking at the overworld and looking at each environment, where you've been, where you're going, where you have still to navigate. And it was just kind of the story that he really wanted to just hit the highlights, but just kind of brush through all the specific stuff that they'll actually be talking about. And it just seemed... it made sense that this is what they've been working on to show the game off, and then now they're going to really start building out the rest of the game. And this is completely on my radar. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, so they're at the same time that this preview is going up, their trailer is going up, as well as their Kickstarter. So if you want more information, whether you are interested in supporting the Kickstarter or not, I'm sure you can find a lot more over there and get their pitch directly. But yeah, I'm interested. I'm looking forward to it. I think that they did really prove themselves with the Messenger, and they've staffed up since then. And I think it'll be a cool game to check out, and definitely for anyone wanting to kind of get back into those Golden Sun vibes. It definitely comes across, I think, a lot.
Golden Sun hype. A game I'm not familiar with at all. I'll leave you to that, Blade.
All right. Thanks, everyone.